Good morning, everyone. As Dr. Longano was saying, my name is Kathryn Toombs, and I am going to today present a bit of a defense for the major and field that I've chosen. I'm going to get the PowerPoint up, though, really quickly. There we go. Said to go away on me. The title of my presentation is Why Good Journalism Still Matters, the Power of Narrative in a World of Subjectivity. And I hope that by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to answer some of the following questions with a resounding yes. Does good journalism still matter? In a world of fake news, clickbait article titles, and alarming displays of media bias, can journalists be trusted? I believe that yes, it does still matter. And despite what many audiences believe, journalism can still be done well. At its heart, journalism is about great narrative. It's about telling human stories. I believe that by becoming more aware of the influence media holds in our society and more committed to thorough research and quality over emotion and immediate impact, we can change the reputation of journalists everywhere and regain the trust and respect of the public. I became a journalism major because I've grown up with a love for stories. I've always been fascinated with how we as humans are naturally drawn to narrative and look to stories as a way of explaining and capturing the world around us. I love the fact that journalism utilizes the power of words and images to tell real human stories. And I hoped that by becoming a journalism major, I would learn how to craft this unique skill of writing creative nonfiction. I wanted to learn how to craft words in a way that meant something. As a journalism major, I've seen firsthand the power of great narrative and the impact it can have when coupled with visuals. During my time at Biola, I've both seen and had the privilege of taking part in some powerful narrative projects. One of my favorite story packages was done by the Washington Post. Dr. Longano actually showed us in our religion, culture, and media class last semester. It's called From Hiroku to Suzy, the untold stories of Japanese war brides. And the story is actually written by the daughter of one of these war brides. So in the story, she incorporates her own experience as a daughter with her mother's experience, her firsthand account, and then several other war brides. She also includes some factual information about the time and about the influx of Japanese women to America after the occupation of Japan in World War II. One of the things I loved about the story was its seamless use of narrative and factual history. The author allowed her interviewees to guide the flow, structure, and tone of the story, an example I think many journalists could learn from. Many times, journalists under deadline approach stories with preconceived narratives already in place, a mindset which can be detrimental to the actual truth of the story. I also had the opportunity to be part of an unprecedented narrative project done by one of our student media groups here on campus, a story on sexual assault at Biola done by The Point magazine. As a part of the editorial staff, I was able to be a part of the key decisions that brought this sensitive, unspeakably important piece to life. Again, by interweaving firsthand accounts with facts about sexual assault on Biola's campus and nationwide, the story was able to carry immense weight. However, at the same time, I've also become aware of just how dangerous a tool of manipulation journalists can be when used to distort the facts. With patronizing titles like, "No, Hillary Clinton did not get more votes than any candidate ever," or headlines that make claims that are nearly impossible to verify for oneself, such as hundreds of scientists urge Trump to withdraw from climate change agency. Many news sources have become less interested in argumentation based on facts and more interested in producing articles which mix entertainment, opinion, and news. They've become politically fueled machines, churning out whatever narrative best suits their party's interest. We no longer seek to inform the people, but manipulate them into believing what we think they should. In this clip, entitled "Can You Trust the Press?", Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Judith Miller explores why it is that most major American news organizations are now seen as inherently biased.
Many sites, including mainstream sites, have abandoned traditional journalistic practices and standards in search of more and more eyeballs. Objectivity, once the gold standard of reporting, is now often seen as old-fashioned, a ratings loser. When success is measured mainly in terms of clicks, the outrageous beats the sober just about every time. Inserting opinion, even in the middle of a news story, is a way in which journalists can distinguish themselves. And in mainstream media outlets, those opinions overwhelmingly tend to be liberal. This might not be so bad if journalists acknowledge their bias, but they almost never do. Yet the bias is obvious. According to a 2014 study by 2 Indiana University professors, reporters who identify as Democrats outnumber those who identify as Republicans by 4 to 1, 28% to 7%. The remaining 65% call themselves independent, but based on my long experience as a reporter, this is a fiction. That is, many reporters like to describe themselves as independent, but they're not. Not really. By any fair measure, this group is overwhelmingly on the political left. The obvious liberal bias has only served to push conservative readers to those sources that cater to conservative themes, further polarizing the media landscape. And unable to attract conservatives, the mainstream media have chosen to double down on views and themes that appeal to their liberal constituency. To give just one example, when Fox News broke a story in January 2016 about the discovery of top-secret intelligence on the private email server that Hillary Clinton used while Secretary of State, classified information which she had denied ever having sent or received, the New York Times buried this news story deep inside the paper. A decline in reporting standards, a decline in revenue, an increase in bias have made many wary of the people who provide them with their news. A certain amount of skepticism is a healthy thing, but a thriving democracy depends on a dynamic and free press. As much as people may like to bash the media, most people would far prefer to trust it. I'm Judith Miller, contributing editor of City Journal for Prager University.
And so just as Judith Miller says in this clip, the press have given the public good reason for distrust, but it's not too late. As a journalism student at Biola, I have had the opportunity to study journalism in its purest form. And as such, I've become increasingly frustrated as I've seen articles and news organizations that violate everything that journalism is supposed to be: objective, informative, and accurate. In my own experience, both writing and editing in my classes here, I witnessed firsthand how tempting it can be to make the story what you want it to be, rather than writing the story that the facts demand. During my time in a commentary, opinions, and reviews class, I remember trying to write a story based on increased numbers of cheating cases in the Bible department, based on a comment made by a professor. When I went to write the story, however, the facts I was gathering weren't supporting my initial assumption. In the moment, I was incredibly tempted to angle the stories that would fit my hypothesis, to keep looking for sources until one of them confirmed what I thought to be the truth. But I resisted. And as I followed the story through, I actually ended up discovering an even more interesting story, one of stressed students, worried professors, and the dangers of unfounded rumors. In one of my semesters as an editor at The Point magazine, we had the great idea to write a piece centered on the fact that it was The Point's 10-year anniversary. It was a list piece, and it was going to highlight 10 of The Point's top stories over the past 10 years, as well as quotes from previous editors. The writer had almost completely finished the piece before we discovered that it wasn't actually The Point's 10-year anniversary. It was its 9th. We found ourselves faced with the dilemma of having a completely done, well-written piece, but unable to publish it. Though we were slightly tempted to publish it anyway, wondering if anyone would actually notice the error, we decided against it and were able to rewrite the story in time for publication. I was reminded through both of these experiences just how crucial thorough research is when approaching a story, and that even while it's important to come into a story with an angle, it's even more important to remain open to wherever the story may lead, even if it goes against your original assumption. But in both of these instances, I and the team I was working with were faced with a definite temptation to act in a way that was unethical. And in a world in which everyone is increasingly encouraged to pursue their own form of truth, where does the field of journalism fit in? Despite the fact that the code of ethics set forth by the Society for Professional Journalists clearly calls for journalists to provide context, label advocacy and commentary, never deliberately distort facts or contexts, and to avoid stereotyping, we still find ourselves looking at headlines like, "Don't compare Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler. It belittles Hitler." Instead of holding to a firm set of principles in our reporting, we've allowed journalism to often become a collection of angry rants with no real basis for our frustration. We've allowed emotions to enter a field which was always meant to remain unbiased. In many ways, the modern world has provided a breeding ground for this kind of emotional anarchy. Twitter is a prime example of this in action. Journalists are now very clearly not objective, sharing their personal opinions on social media for their thousands of followers to read, perhaps without ever actually reading the news article it was based on. According to an article written by the Washington Times, journalists go unhinged on Twitter. The author goes on to quote a media reporter from the Washington Post as remarking, "News reporters are supposed to keep the opinions out of the stories they write to air. Twitter, it seems, is another realm entirely." The author notes that increasingly during the last election season, political reporters were issuing their grievances and snark about Mr. Trump on Twitter and leaving all sense of objectivity behind. Now, this isn't to say that emotion and passion shouldn't motivate and guide reporters, as this often makes us better journalists. But what becomes dangerous is when we allow our personal feelings about a matter to influence our fair reporting of the whole issue, and let these emotions seep into the actual writing of the piece. In today's world, we seem to have lost sight of the fact that everything in life is nuanced. Nothing is purely good or purely evil, and yet it seems as if more and more journalists are leaning towards a mindset in which a point of view, a person, or a people group are either all good or all bad. This kind of thinking can not only mislead our readers, but can mislead us as we pursue a story with an already set narrative in mind. As I observed the state of journalism today and compared it to the education I received here at Biola, I was continually reminded of the essential need for ethical standards in the field of journalism. Though almost every field and career in the world requires some sense of ethics, as journalists, we are called to a high standard. As the watchdogs of government and those who would seek to take power away from the people, we must hold ourselves accountable and be wary of the influence we have over others. We must do our research well, remove ourselves from situations in which our integrity might be compromised, and commit ourselves to the rare art of nonfiction storytelling. Good journalism still matters, because stories will always matter. We are a society built on and around narrative, and as long as there are those who are passionate about the truth and about the people which the truth protects, the need for great journalism will never die. Thank you.